Right now, in different parts of the United States, life looks normal on the surface. People are commuting, kids are in school, businesses are open. But behind that normal routine, the security posture has quietly shifted. Curious police patrols are a little more frequent. Surveillance teams are watching more carefully. Federal agencies are tracking conversations and signals that the general public will never see. The basic reason is straightforward. Officials believe some form of retaliation is possible. Not missiles slashing across the sky, not fighter jets over American cities, but something much less predictable and far harder to interrupt once it begins. Size. After recent strikes against Iran and reports that its supreme leader has been killed, threat levels have climbed. Warnings have become more urgent, and major U.S. cities are now operating under heightened alert. The real question isn't whether tensions are high. They clearly are. The question is what that actually means for you, your city, and everyday life. Are we talking about cyber disruptions, lone attackers, coordinated plots, or just a precautionary stance that sounds more terrifying than the underlying reality? Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack what officials are saying, what experts consider genuinely likely, which cities are boosting security, and most importantly, what Americans need to understand right now, without panic, without exaggeration, and without political spin. Hi, I'm Artur. If you're new here, my focus is on breaking down fast-moving national security stories in a way that's calm, clear, and grounded in verified information, not just whatever is going viral. There is a lot of emotion wrapped up in this situation, and that's completely understandable. Words like retaliation and high alert trigger an immediate sense of fear, especially when they're connected to big U.S. cities. But here's the key point. We have to separate what is theoretically possible from what is realistically probable. In this video, we're going to move step by step through what set off this escalation, why experts say a direct missile strike on the United States is not the main concern, what kinds of threats federal agencies are truly preparing for, and what sensible awareness, rather than panic, looks like right now. Once you see the specific type of threat officials are focused on, the whole story starts to look very different. To understand why cities are on heightened alert, we have to go back to the trigger. The United States, working together with Israel, carried out strikes on Iranian targets. Reports now indicate that Iran's supreme leader, a figure who has been central to that country's power structure for decades, was killed. For Iran, that's not just a military setback, it carries political, symbolic, and deeply personal weight for many people inside the country. When someone who has helped shape a nation's identity for 40 years is suddenly gone, you almost never see a quiet or restrained reaction. Very quickly, Iranian officials signaled that there would be retaliation. President Trump responded with a public warning, telling Iran not to strike back and stating that any counterattack would be met with force. That gives you a very volatile equation. A major strike, confirmed casualties, clear warnings from both governments, and global attention fixated on what happens next. It's the kind of environment that naturally puts intelligence agencies on edge. At this moment, none of those scenarios have been confirmed. There are no public reports of a specific plot or fixed timeline. Agencies are preparing for possibilities, not reacting to a known, scheduled attack. Historically, when international tensions spike, the risk of isolated retaliatory acts increases, and that pattern is what drives this kind of preparation. This is also where uncertainty itself becomes a powerful factor. Some analysts argue that if something were to occur, it could happen quickly, within days, especially if an individual is already radicalized and doesn't need direct coordination. Others point out that even a relatively small operation usually requires planning, communication, and access to resources, which pushes any realistic window into weeks. Intelligence officials rarely attach risk to exact dates, and that lack of precise timing can, by itself, fuel public anxiety. When you hear an official say, "Stay vigilant," it does not translate to, "Something is going to happen tomorrow morning." It means the risk curve has shifted enough that extra awareness and tighter security are justified. Timing also matters from a psychological perspective. Even relatively small attacks are often designed to hit when they'll have maximum emotional impact: busy crowds, iconic locations, or peak hours. But again, we have to distinguish between a city being on elevated alert and there being a confirmed threat. Right now, cities are in prevention mode, not in active response to a known plot. That's a critical difference. Prevention mode means more patrols, closer monitoring, greater information sharing between agencies. It does not mean an attack is guaranteed or imminent. In reality, most periods of high alert end with nothing happening, not because the concern was unfounded, but because increased vigilance itself acted as a brake. That part rarely gets the same media attention as the initial warning. The jump in security presence across several major metropolitan areas isn't random either. There's a clear pattern in which places are being prioritized, and understanding that pattern helps make sense of what's going on. According to federal guidance and local law enforcement briefings, the focus is on big metropolitan hubs: New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Dallas, Seattle, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Miami, and similar cities. That list is not pulled out of thin air. These locations combine large populations, financial centers, transportation hubs, political institutions, and globally recognizable landmarks. When security agencies decide where to put limited resources, they start with the places where any potential incident would have the largest practical and symbolic impact. That doesn't mean there is a specific plan targeting those cities. It means they carry higher strategic value. On the ground, what does high alert actually look like? In practice, it usually means more officers in heavily trafficked areas, a more visible security presence around key infrastructure like subways, train stations, airports, bridges, and crowded public spaces, and local intelligence units working more closely with federal counterparts. In some cases, departments may temporarily shift staffing or adjust shifts so they can respond faster if something does happen. The main point is that this is a precautionary stance. It's designed to close vulnerabilities ahead of time. Law enforcement often increases visibility during major geopolitical flare-ups, not only to discourage potential attackers, but also to reassure the public. When someone hears, "My city is on high alert," their mind often races ahead of the facts. But high alert is about preparation and deterrence, not about a ticking countdown clock. Historically, just having more officers and more coordination has been enough to disrupt plots that rely on surprise, weak security, and predictable blind spots. Beyond the visible security measures, there's another layer to this story that touches almost everyone: the digital one. Cybersecurity experts have been pointing out that if retaliation occurs, cyberspace is a very plausible arena. That's not a guess pulled out of thin air. In recent years, we've seen multiple examples of how even relatively short-lived tech outages, cloud services failing, trading systems hanging, email platforms freezing, software bugs grounding flights, can affect millions of people very quickly. Nearly every part of modern life is wired into interconnected systems. Banks, airlines, hospitals, schools, logistics companies, government agencies, all rely on networks and digital platforms. When those systems stumble, even briefly, the effects ripple outward fast. That's why cyber operations are so appealing in asymmetric conflicts. They can generate confusion and economic disruption without firing a single weapon. They can slow down daily life, stress markets, and shake public confidence without triggering a traditional military response. At the moment, there is no confirmed cyber attack actively disrupting major U.S. infrastructure tied directly to this situation. However, cybersecurity analysts have repeatedly warned that in periods of international tension, digital networks become obvious pressure points. Timing is just as important in the cyber domain as it is in the physical one. If someone wanted to maximize the impact of a digital disruption, they wouldn't choose a quiet holiday weekend. They'd target a busy weekday when markets are running, schools are open, offices are fully staffed, business systems are in full use, and travel is heavy. That's when an outage can ripple across airlines, banking, logistics, and communication platforms all at once. That does not mean there is a fixed date or time when something will happen. It simply means any actor aiming for maximum impact would likely choose a peak dependency moment. Understanding that helps keep expectations grounded. A cyber disruption, while frustrating and sometimes expensive, is not the same thing as a mass casualty attack. Its main purpose is usually psychological and economic, not physical harm. As this situation develops, that's why the focus isn't only on streets, patrol cars, and skylines. It's also on servers, routers, and systems that keep power grids, payment networks, and communications running. That combined physical-digital landscape is what makes this moment more complex than a single headline can capture. If cyber retaliation does occur, experts consistently emphasize one central element: timing. Not because anyone has circled a date on a calendar, but because the effect of disruption scales with how heavily those systems are being used. Midweek, markets open, schools full, corporate networks saturated, travel schedules tight. That's when even a brief outage can cause delayed flights, stalled payments, and frozen communication tools. None of that automatically leads to physical injuries, but it can quickly create confusion. And confusion, in a tense geopolitical environment, can spread fear faster than accurate information can calm it. We've already seen non-hostile examples of this. Cloud providers have gone down and millions lost email access for hours. Trading platforms have lagged and investors panicked. Faulty software updates have slowed security lines and grounded aircraft. Those incidents were not acts of war, but they showed how tightly connected and vulnerable some systems are. That interconnectedness is both a strength and a weakness. So when cybersecurity officials talk about being prepared, they're not trying to scare people. They're acknowledging that a digital shockwave can roll across the country very quickly. The reassuring part is that both government agencies and private infrastructure providers are very aware of this risk. Cyber defense has become one of the most heavily funded corners of national security. Redundant systems, backups, and rapid response teams exist. No system is perfect, but the risk is not being ignored. Meanwhile, events overseas add another layer of tension. In some parts of the Middle East, protests have broken out near U.S. embassies. Demonstrators angry about the strikes have gathered, and in a few instances, have tried to damage property. The images, crowds shouting, objects thrown, barriers reinforced, are dramatic and emotionally charged. But it's essential to distinguish between symbolic unrest abroad and a direct, immediate threat at home. Protests outside embassies, while serious, are not the same thing as a coordinated domestic attack plan inside the United States. They tell us that emotions are high and that geopolitical relationships are under strain. They do not, by themselves, mean a domestic operation is underway. From an intelligence perspective, though, moments like this are exactly when agencies widen their field of view. They monitor communications more closely. They look at patterns in messaging. They try to see if any rhetoric could be inspiring or coordinating action elsewhere. Asymmetric threats rarely move in straight, predictable lines. They can be nudged by speeches, images, rumors, or narratives online. In the current information environment, misinformation can behave almost like a weapon, spreading fear, distorting facts, and making people believe something catastrophic is happening, even when no verified evidence supports that. This is why calm, fact-based analysis is so important right now. The emotional space between "this could happen" and "this is likely to happen" is exactly where most public anxiety lives. Understanding that gap allows you to stay informed without getting overwhelmed. Making this moment even more serious are confirmed reports that 3 U.S. service members have been killed in connection with the conflict. Anytime American personnel are killed, the strategic calculation shifts. It stops being only about warnings and rhetoric and becomes about response, deterrence, and visible resolve. Historically, when U.S. forces suffer casualties linked to an adversary, some kind of counteraction usually follows. That doesn't mean large-scale escalation is guaranteed, but it does mean the pressure to act increases. In high-tension international standoffs, that action-response-counter-response pattern can create a dangerous cycle. Each side trying to show strength without appearing weak or backing down. That cycle is fragile, and in those conditions, misjudgments are one of the largest risks. This is where deterrence theory comes into play. The basic idea is that by clearly demonstrating overwhelming capability and a willingness to use it, you convince the other side that escalating further would be too costly. President Trump's recent public statements that additional threats against the United States will not be tolerated and any further aggression will be met decisively are meant to serve that deterrent function. Strategically, the goal of strong language in a moment like this is to discourage the other side from acting, not to encourage them. But deterrence only works if leaders on both sides genuinely believe that crossing certain lines will bring unacceptable consequences. And in geopolitics, those beliefs are influenced by emotion, domestic politics, and questions of national pride as much as by pure calculation. While that high-level strategic chess match plays out, local law enforcement faces a very different, extremely practical challenge. Police departments in major cities can increase patrols, deepen their coordination with federal task forces, and keep a closer eye on public areas. But completely preventing every possible lone actor scenario is extremely hard. By definition, lone wolf incidents are often characterized by limited communication in advance. There might be no obvious network to infiltrate, no large flow of money, no hierarchical command chain. That's why you so often hear the phrase, "If you see something, say something." It's not a slogan built on paranoia. It's an acknowledgement that people on the ground, residents, commuters, employees, sometimes notice details that sophisticated systems miss. At the same time, law enforcement has to balance vigilance with civil rights. Acting aggressively on vague suspicion, without solid grounds, carries serious risks in a country that values constitutional protections. Overreact and you undermine trust and potentially target innocent people. Underreact and you leave room for real threats. Striking that balance is one of the most difficult aspects of domestic security work. Another reason heightened alert doesn't always look like visible crisis is that much of the effort is happening out of sight, sharing intelligence behind the scenes, running background checks, coordinating across agencies, monitoring patterns quietly. Even when the official alert level is high, most days come and go without incident. Preparedness is about tightening gaps and shrinking opportunity, not about forecasting exact outcomes. Understanding what law enforcement can and can't do helps keep expectations realistic. So, what should ordinary Americans actually do right now? Strip away all the geopolitics, social media, and headlines, and that's the core question. What does this mean for you and your family in practical terms? The most honest answer is, focus on awareness, not anxiety. An elevated alert level does not mean immediate danger. It means officials are paying closer attention and coordinating more intensively. You can't control the global situation, but you can control how you respond to it. Stay informed through credible established sources. Be cautious about sharing or reacting to unverified rumors that spread faster than corrections. If you live in or near a major metropolitan area, just practice the same situational awareness you would at any large public event. Know your surroundings, pay attention to anything that feels off, and have a basic sense of where exits and safe spots are. That isn't living in fear, that's common sense awareness. On the cyber side, basic digital hygiene goes a long way. Keep your phone and computer software up to date. Use strong, unique passwords and turn on two-factor authentication where possible. Be especially careful with unexpected links or attachments, particularly during high-profile international crises when phishing attempts often increase. If cyber disruptions do happen, they're more likely to be temporary and annoying than catastrophic. Being ready for that looks like having backup communication options and a bit of patience, not panic buying. Proportional response is key. Calm, modest preparation is always better than fear-driven overreaction. When we zoom back out to the larger strategic picture, public messaging from national leaders is an important piece of the puzzle. President Trump's line has been clear. Further threats will meet decisive action, and long-running tensions with Iran will not be allowed to escalate unchecked. Domestically, that message is meant to reassure Americans that the government is acting from a position of strength and is serious about defending national interests. Internationally, it serves as a warning, intended to make potential adversaries think twice. The complexity lies in how that message is received. Strong rhetoric can help stabilize a situation if it makes boundaries clear. It can also raise the temperature if the other side interprets it as provocation. Iran's leaders, facing domestic anger and global scrutiny after the reported death of a longtime supreme leader, also have strong incentives to project confidence and resolve. Governments in that position often feel they must respond in some visible way to maintain legitimacy at home. That response may be symbolic, digital, rhetorical, limited, or unexpectedly restrained, depending on internal debates and calculations that the wider world never sees. That internal human decision-making is the piece no analyst can predict with perfect accuracy. There's also one constant in situations like this that's always hard to measure: independent actors. Individuals who are not following any government's orders but feel personally or ideologically compelled to act in response to world events. History shows that geopolitical flashpoints can inspire people far removed from the original conflict zone. Sometimes they exaggerate their importance. Sometimes they act recklessly. Sometimes they're discovered and stopped before anything happens. But the basic unpredictability of human behavior is something no intelligence system can fully remove. That's why, during periods of heightened tension, federal agencies widen their monitoring both abroad and at home. They look for shifts in online rhetoric, sudden spikes in certain types of communication, and ways global narratives are being twisted into personal calls to action. In today's hyper-connected environment, that information flow moves incredibly fast. A rumor can spread nationwide in minutes. A misleading headline can cause panic before it's corrected, if it's corrected at all. Social media can distort perspective, making isolated incidents look widespread or turning routine security measures into evidence that disaster is imminent. Separating signal from noise becomes essential. Raised alert levels are not rare during major global shifts. In fact, many such alert periods end without any incident on U.S. soil. That doesn't mean the concern was fake. It often means the combination of deterrence, preparedness, and quiet behind-the-scenes work did what it was supposed to do. Increased patrols discouraged attempts. Shared intelligence disrupted planning. Cyber teams fixed weak spots before anyone reached them. The absence of a visible event is often the result of heavy, invisible effort. This is where perspective matters most. Fear tends to think in absolutes. Either everything is fine, or catastrophe is around the corner. National security in real life operates in shades of probability and layers of mitigation. Right now, risk assessments have shifted enough to justify more vigilance, especially around major cities and critical digital systems. But that is still a long way from saying an attack is inevitable. If you look back at earlier periods of tension with countries like Iran, North Korea, or Russia, you see a familiar pattern: tough language, elevated alerts, military repositioning, and then, frequently, a gradual easing as each side tests boundaries, communicates red lines, and looks for a way to step back without losing face. That doesn't guarantee calm, but it reminds us that escalation is not automatic. There are off-ramps. There are quiet diplomatic channels the public never sees. There are strong incentives on all sides to avoid spiraling into consequences no one can control. Keeping that in mind helps shrink fear down to a more realistic scale. Yes, uncertainty exists, but so do safeguards. Yes, there are risks, but there are also robust defenses and multiple layers of protection. Headlines may amplify urgency, but probabilities still matter. So where does that leave us right now? It leaves us in a period of heightened vigilance, not hysteria. Officials are watching closely. Major cities have increased visible patrols. Cybersecurity teams are reinforcing digital defenses. Intelligence agencies are focused mainly on small, asymmetric risks rather than large, conventional ones. And experts remain consistent on one central point. A direct missile strike from Iran on the U.S. mainland is not the realistic concern. The focus is on smaller-scale, harder-to-predict possibilities. Lone individuals, isolated incidents, or temporary cyber disruptions designed to create confusion more than mass destruction. It's also worth remembering that the United States has lived through elevated threat environments many times before. After major international flashpoints, security posture tightens, systems are tested, agencies coordinate more closely, and in most cases, everyday life goes on largely uninterrupted, precisely because those precautions are in place. Seeing more police in New York or Los Angeles doesn't mean something is scheduled to happen there. It means those cities are high-value hubs and extra care is being taken accordingly. That's strategy, not panic. At the same time, confirmed casualties among U.S. service members ensure that this situation is being treated very seriously at the highest levels of government. Strategic messaging is aimed at discouraging further escalation. Whether it ultimately calms things down or intensifies the rhetoric will depend on choices being made far from public view. That human element in international power struggles will always be the hardest part to predict. For everyday Americans, the bottom line is steady, informed awareness. Stay up to date through credible sources. Use basic caution online. Pay attention to your surroundings, especially in crowded public places. If you see something that genuinely looks suspicious, report it through official channels. But don't let speculative worst-case scenarios drown out probability and perspective. A heightened alert level is a protective stance, not a stopwatch counting down. As of now, cities are operating, infrastructure is intact, and there has been no confirmed domestic attack tied to this escalation. Agencies are in prevention mode, and while tensions are very real, so are the safeguards built over decades to handle moments like this. I'll keep following developments and breaking them down as clearly as possible as new information emerges. In times like these, clarity matters more than volume. Stay safe, stay aware, and we'll face whatever comes next with facts, not fear.